The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Riverside Community Center in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Inside, a fundraising gala was underway, the kind of event where champagne flowed freely and conversations revolved around tax brackets and summer homes. Outside, a different world existed entirely. 15 motorcycles lined up in perfect formation, their chrome catching the light like silver sentinels guarding something sacred. Victoria Ashford stepped out of her black Mercedes, her heels clicking against the pavement with the precision of a metronome. She was the wife of Senator Marcus Ashford, a man whose political ambitions had taken them from small-town obscurity to the gilded halls of Washington. Victoria had embraced the transformation completely, shedding her humble origins like a snake discards its skin. Now she wore designer clothes, attended charity galas, and looked down upon anyone she deemed beneath her station. Her assistant, a nervous young woman named Emily, hurried behind her carrying a leather portfolio and a backup pair of shoes. Victoria had learned long ago that appearances were everything in politics. A single wrinkle, a misplaced hair, could be the difference between a favorable photograph and a scandal. She had cultivated her image with the same ruthless efficiency her husband applied to his political campaigns. The community center was hosting a dual event that day. Inside, the political elite gathered to raise money for a children's hospital. Outside, a motorcycle club called the Iron Guardians had organized a charity ride to benefit the same hospital. The two groups were supposed to remain separate, a careful arrangement made by the event coordinator to avoid any potential conflicts. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The Iron Guardians were not your typical motorcycle club. Founded 15 years ago by Marcus Kane, a retired Marine who had served 3 tours overseas, the club had grown from a small group of veterans seeking brotherhood into a respected community organization. They ran toy drives during the holidays, escorted children with serious illnesses to their treatments, and provided security for families in witness protection programs. Their leather vests bore patches that told stories of service, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Marcus Kane himself was a man of few words but immense presence. At 53 years old, he stood 6 feet tall, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail and a beard that had gone completely gray. His eyes, a pale blue that seemed to see right through pretense, had witnessed both the worst and best of humanity. He had buried friends in foreign deserts and delivered Christmas presents to children who had never received a single gift in their lives. He understood that strength meant nothing without compassion, that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. Today, the Iron Guardians had completed a 200-mile charity ride, collecting donations from towns across the county. Their saddlebags were filled with cash and checks, all destined for the pediatric oncology unit at Mercy General Hospital. They had stopped at the community center to drop off their donations and perhaps grab a cup of coffee before the long ride home. Victoria spotted them as she approached the entrance. She wrinkled her nose as if she had encountered something unpleasant, her eyes scanning the row of motorcycles with obvious disdain. The bikers were removing their helmets, stretching their legs, laughing among themselves about something that had happened during the ride. They were dusty from the road, their leather vests worn and marked with countless miles of travel. One of the younger members, a 28-year-old named Derek, noticed Victoria staring. He smiled politely and nodded in her direction, a simple gesture of acknowledgement. Victoria responded by pulling her purse closer to her body, as if she expected him to snatch it at any moment. Marcus noticed the exchange. He had seen that look before, countless times. The assumption that leather and tattoos equaled danger, the prejudice that painted all bikers with the same brush used for outlaw gangs in movies and television shows. He had stopped letting it bother him years ago, but it still disappointed him. People like Victoria Ashford would never understand that the patches on his vest represented more charitable hours than most politicians logged in their entire careers. The bikers gathered their donation bags and headed toward the community center entrance. They had an appointment with the event coordinator to hand over their contributions. It was supposed to be a simple transaction, a handoff that would take no more than 5 minutes. But Victoria Ashford had other ideas. She positioned herself directly in their path, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression one of undisguised contempt. Emily tugged at her arm, whispering urgently, but Victoria shook her off. She had spotted an opportunity, a chance to make herself look good by putting these rough-looking men in their place. Marcus stopped a few feet away, his expression neutral. He had learned patience in the Marines, the kind of patience that could outlast any provocation. He met Victoria's gaze calmly, waiting for her to speak first. She did not disappoint. Her voice carried across the parking lot, loud enough for several other arriving guests to hear. She wanted an audience for what came next. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her tone dripping with condescension, "but I believe you and your associate are at the wrong event. The county fair is across town. They have a section for people like you, complete with fried food and carnival games." A few of the other bikers shifted uncomfortably, but Marcus raised a hand, signaling them to remain calm. He had heard worse, much worse, during his years of service. Words were just words. They only held power if you let them. "Ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice quiet but clear. "We're here to deliver donations to the Children's Hospital fundraiser. We have an appointment with Mrs. Patterson, the event coordinator." Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed off the community center walls. "Donations? From a biker gang? Please? What did you do, rob a convenience store and decide to give away the evidence?" Behind her, several of the arriving guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some of them recognized Marcus and his club from the numerous news stories about their charitable work. But they said nothing, too cowed by Victoria's political connections to speak up. Emily tried again to intervene. "Mrs. Ashford, perhaps we should go inside. Your husband is waiting and the photographer needs to—" "Be quiet, Emily," Victoria snapped. She turned back to Marcus, emboldened by his lack of reaction. "Listen, I do not know what kind of publicity stunt you are trying to pull here, but this is a respectable event for respectable people. We do not need your kind tarnishing the occasion. So why don't you get back on your little motorcycles and ride off to whatever roadside bar you crawled out of?" The parking lot had gone silent. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Marcus could feel the tension radiating from his fellow club members, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. But he also knew that losing his temper would only prove Victoria right in her own mind. It would give her exactly what she wanted. He took a slow breath, centering himself the way he had been taught decades ago. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, still measured. "Ma'am, I served this country for 23 years. I watched friends sacrifice their lives so that people like you could enjoy the freedom to say whatever you want, however hurtful it might be. I don't expect gratitude or respect, but I do expect basic decency, especially at an event meant to help sick children." Victoria's eyes narrowed. She was not accustomed to being spoken to this way, not accustomed to anyone pushing back against her. Her husband's position usually guaranteed automatic deference. "Are you threatening me?" she demanded. "Because I can have you arrested. My husband is Senator Marcus Ashford. One phone call and you'll be spending the night in a cell." "No threat, ma'am. Just a fact. We're here to help sick kids. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, if you'll excuse us." Marcus stepped around her, his club members following in his wake. They moved with the quiet discipline of men who had been trained to ignore distractions and focus on the mission. Their boots made soft sounds on the pavement as they approached the community center doors. But Victoria was not finished. She spun around, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The arriving guests were staring now, and not at the bikers. "This is not over," she called after them. "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of lowlifes tried to crash our event. You'll regret ever showing your faces here." Marcus paused at the door. He turned back, just for a moment, and met Victoria's gaze one final time. "Ma'am," he said, "the only thing I regret is that sick children have to rely on people like us to help them, while people like you spend more on champagne than you donate to charity." Then he was gone, disappearing into the community center with his brothers, leaving Victoria standing alone in the parking lot with nothing but her rage and her embarrassment to keep her company. Inside, Mrs. Patterson was waiting for them. She was a kind woman in her 60s, with silver hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on the end of her nose. She had worked with the Iron Guardians before and knew exactly what kind of men they were. "Marcus!" she exclaimed, rushing forward to greet them. "Right on time, as always. The hospital administrator is here. She's been so excited to meet you all in person." The bikers spread out through the small meeting room, pulling stacks of cash and checks from their saddlebags. The total would exceed $23,000, all of it raised in a single day from small towns across the county. Farmers had contributed. Shop owners had contributed. Even a group of elementary school students had held a lemonade stand and donated every penny. Mrs. Patterson counted the donations with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the generosity. The hospital administrator, Dr. Sarah Chen, watched with tears in her eyes. She had spent years fighting for funding, for resources, for anything that could help her young patients. And here, in a worn leather vest, stood more compassion than she had encountered in a dozen political fundraisers. "This is incredible," Dr. Chen whispered. "Do you know how many treatments this will cover? How many families won't have to choose between their child's health and their mortgage?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He never knew how to handle gratitude. It felt unearned somehow, as if he were being praised for doing something that should have been automatic. "Just doing what we can, Doc. These kids didn't ask to be sick. Least we can do is make their fight a little easier." Outside, Victoria had finally composed herself enough to enter the building. She marched through the main hall where the gala was taking place, her expression a mask of controlled fury. Her husband spotted her from across the room and made his way over, his politician's smile firmly in place. "Victoria, darling, where have you been? The photographer has been asking for you." "There were some undesirables in the parking lot," she replied, keeping her voice low. "Bikers. Can you imagine? They claimed to be here for the charity event. I told them exactly what I thought of their kind." Senator Ashford's smile flickered for just a moment. He had built his career on careful image management, on never making enemies unnecessarily. His wife's tendency toward public confrontation had caused problems before. "What exactly did you say to them?" Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Nothing they didn't deserve. Honestly, Marcus, these people have no place at an event like this. They're probably criminals, every one of them." The senator sighed internally, but kept his expression neutral. He would deal with this later, he decided. For now, the photographer was indeed waiting, and there were donors to charm and promises to make. Meanwhile, in the small meeting room, the Iron Guardians were finishing their business. Dr. Ao Chen had taken photographs of the donation handoff, pictures that would go on the hospital's website and social media pages. Mrs. Patterson had provided coffee and pastries, insisting that the bikers stay for at least a few minutes of refreshment. It was during this brief respite that the door opened and a small face appeared in the gap. A boy, perhaps 8 years old, with a bald head and the thin frame that spoke of too many treatments and too few meals. He was wearing a hospital gown beneath a thin jacket, and an IV pole stood sentinel beside him. His name was Tommy, and he was a patient at Mercy General. He had been brought to the community center by his mother, who was attending the gala in hopes of meeting the senator and pleading for increased funding for pediatric care. Tommy had wandered away from the main hall, bored by the adult conversations and drawn by the sound of deep voices and laughter coming from the meeting room. "Are you really bikers?" he asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Marcus knelt down to the boy's level, his gruff exterior softening instantly. "We sure are, little man. You like motorcycles?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically, then winced as the movement made him dizzy. "I always wanted to ride one. My dad used to have a motorcycle before." He trailed off, and Marcus understood without needing to hear the rest. He had seen that look in the eyes of children before, the look of loss and grief and desperate hope all mixed together. "Well," Marcus said, "maybe when you get better we can arrange a ride for you. How does that sound?" Tommy's face lit up like a sunrise. "Really? You mean it?" "I never say anything I don't mean, that's the code." The boy's mother appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with worry. She was a young woman, barely 30, with dark circles under her eyes and the exhausted expression of someone who had been fighting a battle that had no clear end. "Tommy, I've been looking everywhere for you. I'm so sorry, No need to apologize, ma'am," Marcus assured her. "Tommy here was just telling us about his love of motorcycles." The woman's eyes flickered to the leather vests, the patches, the weathered faces of the men surrounding her son. For a moment, uncertainty crossed her features. Then Tommy spoke. "Mom, these are the guys from the hospital website. They're the ones who raised all that money. Mr. Marcus said he'd take me on a motorcycle ride when I get better." The woman's hand went to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. She had seen the news stories, the articles about the Iron Guardians and their charitable work. She had just never expected to meet them in person. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything you're doing. Tommy's treatments. The hospital has been amazing, but the costs..." Marcus stood, reaching into his vest pocket. He pulled out a business card, simple and unadorned, with just a name and a phone number. "You call that number anytime, day or night. If you need help with anything, transportation to treatments, groceries, someone to mow your lawn, whatever it is, you call. That's what we do." The woman took the card with trembling hands, clutching it like a lifeline. In the world she had been navigating, a world of insurance forms and medical bills and endless uncertainty, such simple offers of help were rare as diamonds. "I don't know what to say." "Don't need to say anything. Just focus on getting this little warrior better. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like Tommy's happen every day, and channels like this one are the only places where they get told. One click. That's all it takes to make sure you never miss another moment that reminds you humanity still has heroes." The gala continued in the main hall, champagne flowing like water and conversations buzzing with the particular energy of people who believe themselves important. Senator Marcus Ashford worked the room with practiced ease, shaking hands and making promises that he might or might not keep, depending on how the political winds blew. Victoria had recovered from her parking lot confrontation and was now holding court near the silent auction tables. She had gathered a small group of admirers around her, women with perfect hair and designer handbags who laughed at her jokes and agreed with her opinions. She was telling them about the bikers, her version of events, casting herself as the brave defender of civilized society. "You should have seen them," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard by nearby tables. "Covered in tattoos, smelling like engine oil and cheap beer. And they had the audacity to claim they were here for the children's charity. As if criminals like that care about sick children." One of the women, a real estate developer's wife named Catherine, nodded sympathetically. "How frightening for you, Victoria. Did you call security?" "I handled it myself. Sometimes you have to be direct with these people. They only understand strength." At the edge of the group, Emily stood silently, her eyes downcast. She had witnessed the actual confrontation and knew that Victoria's version bore little resemblance to reality, but she also knew that speaking up would cost her the job she desperately needed. So she remained silent, complicit by her silence. In the meeting room, the Iron Guardians were preparing to leave. Tommy and his mother had returned to the main hall, the boy clutching a small toy motorcycle that one of the bikers had produced from his saddlebag. It was a trinket, something Derek had picked up at a gas station for $1, but to Tommy it was a treasure beyond price. Mrs. Patterson was thanking Marcus profusely, pressing a small box of homemade cookies into his hands for the ride home. The woman had a grandmotherly soul, the kind that expressed love through baked goods and fussing. "You boys be careful on those roads," she admonished, "and come back next year. We'll have an even bigger event." "Count on it, Mrs. P." The bikers filed out through a side exit, avoiding the main hall and its champagne-fueled gossip. They had no desire for confrontation, no need to prove anything to people whose opinions mattered less than the dust on their boots. Their work was done, their mission accomplished. They were mounting their motorcycles when a commotion erupted from the front of the building, raised voices, a woman screaming, the sound of something breaking. Marcus held up a hand, halting his brothers mid-motion. "Wait here." He walked around the corner of the building, his boots crunching on gravel, and found himself facing a scene that would change everything. A white van had pulled up to the front entrance, and two men were dragging Tommy's mother toward it. The woman was fighting with everything she had, kicking and screaming, but the men were larger and stronger. Tommy stood frozen on the sidewalk, his small fists clenched, his toy motorcycle fallen at his feet. Time seemed to slow as Marcus assessed the situation. The men were professionals, their movements coordinated and efficient. This was not a random crime of opportunity. This was planned. He moved without thinking, decades of training taking over. His voice boomed across the parking lot, a command that had once echoed across desert battlefields. "Let her go, now!" The men paused, startled by the interruption. One of them reached for something at his belt, but Marcus was already closing the distance between them, moving with a speed that belied his age. "I said let her go." Behind him, he heard the thunder of boots on pavement as his brothers appeared around the corner. 15 men in leather vests, their faces hard with determination, spread out to form a semicircle around the van. The men holding Tommy's mother suddenly found themselves outnumbered and outmatched. "This isn't your business, old man," one of them snarled. "Walk away!" "Everything that happens in front of me is my business. That's the code. Now you've got two choices. Let the lady go and drive away, or stay and explain to the police why you were trying to kidnap a woman in broad daylight." The standoff lasted perhaps 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. The men exchanged glances, calculating their odds. 15 bikers, most of them military veterans, all of them ready to fight. The math was not in their favor. They released Tommy's mother, shoving her forward with unnecessary roughness. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Derek was there to catch her. His young face was tight with controlled anger. "This isn't over," the man warned as he climbed into the van. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Neither do you." The van peeled away, tires squealing, leaving behind the smell of burning rubber and unanswered questions. Tommy ran to his mother, throwing his arms around her waist, his small body shaking with sobs. Mommy, are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Marcus could see it in her eyes, the terror that had not yet faded, the realization that something much larger than a random crime had just happened. He approached her slowly, giving her space, letting her come to him when she was ready. "Ma'am, do you know those men?" She shook her head, then hesitated. I'm not sure. I thought I recognized one of them, but I can't be certain." "Where do you think you might have seen him before?" Another hesitation, longer this time. Her eyes darted toward the community center, toward the gala still in progress inside, toward the world of champagne and political connections. I think he might work for my ex-husband." The pieces began to fall into place. Marcus had seen situations like this before, custody disputes that turned ugly, men who believed they owned their former partners and children like property. But something about this felt different, bigger somehow. "We need to call the police." "No!" The word came out sharp, frightened. "Please, no police. My ex-husband, he has connections, important connections. The police won't help. They never help." Marcus studied her face, reading the fear and desperation written there. She was telling the truth, or at least the truth as she understood it. She believed that going to the authorities would only make things worse. "What's your name, ma'am?" Sarah Mitchell, and this is Tommy." "Sarah, I'm Marcus. These are my brothers. We're going to help you." "You can't. You don't understand. My ex-husband is—" "I don't care who your ex-husband is. I've faced worse than politicians and businessmen. What matters right now is getting you and Tommy somewhere safe." Victoria Ashford chose that moment to emerge from the community center, drawn by the commotion. She took in the scene with wide eyes, the bikers, the frightened woman, the crying child. Her mind immediately jumped to conclusions. "I knew it!" she shrieked. "I knew these criminals would cause trouble! Someone call the police! These men are attacking this poor woman!" Several of the gala attendees had followed her outside, curious about the disturbance. They murmured among themselves, uncertain about what they were seeing. Mrs. Ashford, Marcus said, his voice flat. These men just prevented an attempted kidnapping. Maybe you should get your facts straight before throwing accusations around. Kidnapping? Please. You probably staged this whole thing for attention. I'm calling my husband. We'll have all of you arrested. Sarah stepped forward, her arm still around Tommy, her voice shaking but determined. He's telling the truth. 2 men tried to drag me into a van. These bikers saved my life. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She had not expected this, had not anticipated that her accusations would be so immediately contradicted. Her social instincts screamed at her to retreat, to reassess, but her pride would not allow it. I don't believe it. This is obviously some kind of scheme. My husband warned me about people like you, trying to scam their way into the spotlight. Ma'am, Derek interjected, his young voice tight with barely controlled anger. With all due respect, you weren't here. You didn't see what happened. Maybe instead of calling us criminals, you should be asking why someone tried to kidnap a woman in the parking lot of your precious charity event. The assembled crowd had grown larger now, attracted by raised voices and the promise of drama. Among them, Senator Ashford himself emerged, his politician's smile replaced by a calculating expression. He took in the scene quickly, assessing the potential damage to his reputation. What's going on here? He demanded. Victoria, what's happened? These bikers. Dad? The voice was small, confused, achingly familiar. Senator Ashford turned toward the source and found himself face to face with Tommy Mitchell, the son he had abandoned 3 years ago when he left Sarah for a younger woman with better political connections. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face went pale as she looked between her husband and the child, understanding dawning in her eyes. The assembled guests exchanged shocked glances, recognizing that something far more significant than a simple confrontation was unfolding before them. Senator Ashford, Marcus said slowly, the pieces clicking into place, would you happen to know anything about why someone would want to kidnap your ex-wife? The politician's face had gone rigid, a mask of forced composure. I have no idea what you're talking about. Then you won't mind explaining to the nice people here why you're pretending not to know your own son. Tommy had recognized his father the moment he emerged from the building. 3 years of absence, of birthday cards that never came, of Christmas mornings without presents, had not erased the memory of the man who used to read him bedtime stories. But those memories had curdled, turning from warmth to hurt to a question that had no answer. Why did Daddy leave? Tommy, Sarah said gently, pulling her son close. We should go. But that's Dad. Why won't he talk to me? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Senator Ashford looked around at the watching faces, at the cameras that had appeared from nowhere, someone was recording on their phone, at the potential career-ending scandal unfolding before him. His mind raced through possible responses, possible spin, possible damage control, but before he could speak, Victoria beat him to it. That woman is lying, she announced. She's obviously coached the child to say those things. This is blackmail, pure and simple. Marcus, call our lawyer immediately. Victoria, the senator said quietly, please stop talking. But I said stop. The command in his voice silenced her, but the damage was already done. The crowd had seen enough, heard enough. Even those who supported the senator politically were now looking at him with new eyes, with doubt and suspicion. Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between the senator and Sarah. Here's what's going to happen. Sarah and Tommy are coming with us. They're going to somewhere safe, somewhere your hired thugs can't find them. And then you're going to answer some questions about why you sent men to kidnap the mother of your child. This is ridiculous. I didn't send anyone. Then you won't mind if we let the authorities sort it out. But not the local cops. I've got contacts at the state level, people who don't owe their careers to your political machine. Senator Ashford's composure cracked, just for a moment, revealing the calculation beneath. He was weighing his options, looking for an angle, searching for leverage. But he found none. The bikers had him outnumbered and outmaneuvered. And worse, they had witnesses. Fine, he said finally. Take her. But this conversation isn't over. No, Marcus agreed. It's just beginning. The Iron Guardians formed a protective cordon around Sarah and Tommy, escorting them to the waiting motorcycles. Derek found an extra helmet in his saddlebag, child-sized, kept for exactly these situations. He knelt down to help Tommy put it on. "You okay, little man?" Tommy nodded, his eyes still wet with tears, but his jaw set with determination. "Mr. Marcus said you help people. That's what you're doing, right? Helping us?" "That's exactly what we're doing, and we're not going to stop until you and your mom are safe." They rode away from the community center in formation, engines rumbling like thunder, leaving behind a parking lot full of stunned gala attendees and a politician whose carefully constructed facade had begun to crumble. Victoria stood beside her husband, her face pale, her earlier confidence utterly evaporated. "Marcus," she whispered, "what's going on? Who is that woman?" The senator did not answer. He was too busy watching the motorcycles disappear down the road, too busy calculating the potential fallout from this disaster. His wife's thoughtless confrontation had set in motion a chain of events that could destroy everything he had built. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a cold voice reminded him that the men he had hired to solve his custody problem had failed, had been seen, had been recorded. This was not over, not by a long shot. The Iron Guardians clubhouse was located on a 10-acre property outside of town, a former farm that had been converted into a combination meeting hall, garage, and emergency shelter. The main building was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, its walls covered with photographs and memorabilia from decades of charitable work. Awards from grateful communities lined one shelf. Letters from children the club had helped filled several scrapbooks. Sarah and Tommy were given a room in the guest wing, a comfortable space with 2 beds, a private bathroom, and a view of the surrounding fields. The walls were decorated with pictures of motorcycles and American flags, but also with artwork from children who had stayed here before, each piece a testament to lives touched and futures saved. "You're safe here," Marcus assured them. "This property has security you can't see, cameras and sensors and early warning systems. If anyone tries to come here uninvited, we'll know long before they arrive." Sarah sat on the edge of one bed, her son curled up beside her, finally succumbing to exhaustion. The past few hours had been overwhelming for both of them, a whirlwind of fear and relief and unanswered questions. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." "We know enough. We know that someone tried to hurt you. We know that a child is in danger. That's enough for us." "But Marcus, Senator Ashford, he's powerful. He has connections everywhere. When he finds out you're sheltering us, he'll make your lives difficult." Marcus pulled up a chair and sat down across from her, his expression calm and steady. "Ma'am, let me tell you something about us. Most of the men in this club served our country in one way or another. Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force. We've faced enemies you can't imagine, in places most people have never heard of. We've buried friends and watched brothers come home broken. After all that, do you think we're afraid of a politician?" Sarah looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his eyes that she had not expected. Not just strength, but compassion. Not just determination, but understanding. This man had seen darkness, had walked through it, and had emerged with his humanity intact. "Tell me about your ex-husband," Marcus said. "Tell me everything." And so Sarah told him. She told him about meeting Marcus Ashford when she was 22, a young nurse at a small-town hospital. He had been a state legislator then, charming and ambitious, with a vision for his political future that had seemed inspiring rather than calculating. They had married within a year, and Tommy had arrived 2 years later. The problems began almost immediately. Marcus had wanted a wife who would support his career, who would stand beside him at events and smile for the cameras and ask no questions about where he went or what he did. Sarah had wanted a partner, a husband, a father for her child. The mismatch had become apparent quickly. When Tommy was 5, Senator Ashford had asked for a divorce. He had met Victoria by then, a woman whose family connections and social ambition aligned perfectly with his own goals. The divorce had been brutal, with Ashford's lawyers working to minimize any financial settlement and, most painfully, any custody arrangement that would interfere with his political image. In the end, Sarah had received primary custody, but almost nothing else. Ashford had agreed to child support payments that never arrived consistently, had promised visitation that he canceled more often than he kept, had slowly but surely erased his son from his life. When he remarried Victoria, the erasure became complete. Tommy asked about his father for the first 2 years, Sarah said, her voice thick with old pain. Every day. Why doesn't Daddy call? Why doesn't Daddy come visit? And then one day he stopped asking. I don't know which was worse. What changed recently? Why would Ashford suddenly send men after you? Sarah hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. I received this last week. It's from a journalist at the state's largest newspaper. She's been investigating Ashford for months, following a paper trail of corruption and illegal campaign contributions, and she found out that Tommy exists. Marcus took the envelope and examined its contents. Inside were copies of documents, financial records, photographs. A story was taking shape, one of a powerful man who had used his position to enrich himself and his allies while ordinary people suffered. The journalist wants to do a story about Ashford's abandoned family, Sarah continued. A human interest piece that would run alongside the corruption investigation. She says it would humanize the larger story, help readers understand the kind of man Ashford really is. And Ashford found out about this? He must have. I don't know how, but he must have. The attempted kidnapping, it makes sense now. If Tommy and I disappeared, there would be no story. No human interest angle. Just allegations of financial crimes that his lawyers could tie up in court for years. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing this information. The situation was more complex than he had initially realized. This was not just a custody dispute. It was a political cover-up with potentially national implications. The journalist, he said. What's her name? Rebecca Torres. She works for the Capital Gazette. And does she know what happened today? I was supposed to meet her this week to do a preliminary interview, but after what happened, you need to meet with her more than ever. Your story needs to be told, Sarah, not just for your sake, but for everyone Ashford has hurt. Tommy stirred on the bed, his small voice cutting through the heavy conversation. Mom? Are we going to be okay? Sarah gathered her son into her arms, holding him close. Yes, baby. We're going to be okay. These nice people are going to help us. Like superheroes? Exactly like superheroes. Marcus watched the exchange, feeling something shift in his chest. He had joined the military at 18, seeking purpose and direction. He had found both, along with brothers who would walk through fire for each other. When he had returned home, scarred in ways both visible and invisible, he had created the Iron Guardians to continue that mission, to protect those who could not protect themselves, to stand up when others looked away. This was why they existed. This moment, this mother, this child. Sarah, he said, I'm going to make some calls. We have contacts who can help. Lawyers and journalists and former law enforcement. By this time tomorrow, Ashford is going to realize that he picked the wrong family to threaten. Why? She asked, the question that had been haunting her since the parking lot. Why would you risk everything for strangers? Marcus stood, his expression thoughtful. When I was in Afghanistan, my unit found a village that had been terrorized by local militants. The villagers had nothing, no power, no weapons, no hope. But they had each other. And when we arrived, they didn't see American soldiers. They saw people who might help. That look in their eyes, that desperate hope. It changed everything for me. He paused, looking at Tommy's sleeping face. Every child deserves to feel safe. Every mother deserves to protect her baby. And every person who has the power to help has the responsibility to do so. That's not heroism. That's just being human. If this story is touching your heart right now, pause for a moment. Leave a comment with the words, "Family is who shows up." Let us know that you believe, like we do, That real family is not defined by papers or courtrooms, but by the people who stand beside you when everything falls apart. The next 48 hours were a flurry of activity. Marcus made good on his promise, calling in favors accumulated over 15 years of charitable work and community service. A lawyer named Patricia Hernandez, known for her willingness to take on cases against powerful opponents, agreed to represent Sarah pro bono. A former state police investigator named William Chen, now working as a private consultant, began looking into the men who had attempted the kidnapping. Rebecca Torres arrived at the clubhouse on the second day, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a notebook that seemed permanently attached to her hand. She had been a journalist for 2 decades, covering everything from local school boards to federal corruption cases. When she heard about the attempted kidnapping, she had known immediately that this story was bigger than she had originally thought. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, settling into a chair in the clubhouse's meeting room, "I want you to know that anything you tell me will be handled with the utmost care. I'm not interested in sensationalism, I'm interested in truth." Sarah nodded, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "I understand. I want to tell the truth. I've been silent for too long." The interview lasted 3 hours. Sarah talked about her marriage, about the early warning signs she had ignored, about the slow process of realizing that the man she had married was not who she thought he was. She talked about the divorce, the custody battle, the way Ashford had used his money and connections to stack the deck against her. And she talked about Tommy, about watching her son wait by the window for a father who never came, about answering questions she did not know how to answer, about trying to explain to a child that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you cannot or will not. Rebecca listened without interruption, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Sarah finished, the journalist sat in silence for a long moment. "Mrs. Mitchell, your story is going to help a lot of people. Not just because it exposes Ashford, but because it shows other women in your situation that they're not alone, that they can fight back." "I'm not fighting for myself," Sarah said quietly. "I'm fighting for Tommy. He deserves to know that his mother didn't give up." Meanwhile, William Chen had made progress on identifying the would-be kidnappers. Using footage from security cameras near the community center and contacts in law enforcement, he had traced the van to a rental company in the state capital. The paperwork led to a shell company, which led to a holding corporation, which eventually led to a law firm that had done extensive work for Senator Ashford's various business interests. "It's not a smoking gun," Chen explained to Marcus, spreading documents across the meeting room table. "But it's a clear connection. Ashford is smart enough to keep his fingerprints off the actual crime, but the organizational structure points directly at him. Can we prove it in court? Maybe, maybe not. But we can definitely prove it in the court of public opinion, which might be more important right now." The Iron Guardians had also been busy. Derek and several other younger members had established a rotating watch on the property, ensuring that Sarah and Tommy were never unguarded. Other members had reached out to allied motorcycle clubs across the state, putting out word that the Iron Guardians had a situation and might need backup. The response had been overwhelming. Within 24 hours, nearly 100 bikers from various clubs had offered their support. Some were veterans like Marcus and his brothers. Others were just ordinary people who had heard about the Iron Guardians' charitable work and wanted to help. All of them shared a simple belief: that protecting the vulnerable was a duty, not a choice. Senator Ashford, meanwhile, was scrambling. His attempt to make the kidnapping story go away had backfired spectacularly, and now he was facing multiple threats on multiple fronts. The journalist was proceeding with her investigation. His ex-wife was no longer alone and afraid, and the bikers who had interfered with his plans were proving to be far more formidable opponents than he had anticipated. He called an emergency meeting with his closest advisors, held in a private room at his golf club where they could not be overheard. "This is a disaster," he fumed, pacing back and forth. "I specifically told you to handle this quietly. Instead, you hired incompetent idiots who got caught on camera." His campaign manager, a slick-haired man named Gerald, shifted uncomfortably. "Senator, the men we used had excellent references. No one could have predicted that a biker gang would be present." "They're not a gang. They're a charity organization. They have connections to law enforcement, to the media, to half the veteran groups in the state. Do you understand what kind of hornet's nest you've kicked over? We can still control this. If we get ahead of the story, frame it as a custody dispute that got out of hand. A custody dispute? There's video of men trying to drag my ex-wife into a van. How exactly do we spin that? The room fell silent. None of Ashford's advisors had a good answer, because there was no good answer. They had underestimated Sarah's resolve, underestimated the Iron Guardian's resources, and most critically, underestimated the power of ordinary people refusing to look away when something wrong was happening. Victoria Ashford was notably absent from the meeting. She had retreated to their home after the incident at the community center, refusing to speak to her husband or anyone else. The revelation that Marcus had a child from his previous marriage, a child he had essentially abandoned, had shattered something in her. She had known he was ambitious, known he could be ruthless, but she had believed that she was special, that she was different from the people he stepped over on his way to the top. Now, she was not so sure. Back at the clubhouse, Tommy was beginning to adjust to his new surroundings. The members of the Iron Guardians had adopted him as a kind of mascot, teaching him about motorcycles, playing catch with him in the fields, treating him with the gentle patience that came naturally to men who had spent their lives protecting others. Derek had become particularly attached to the boy. He was the youngest member of the club, 28 years old, and he saw in Tommy something of himself at that age. Derek had grown up in foster care, bounced from home to home, never quite belonging anywhere. It was only when he joined the military and later the Iron Guardians that he found the family he had always wanted. "Hey, little man," he said one afternoon, finding Tommy sitting alone on the clubhouse porch. "What are you thinking about?" Tommy was quiet for a moment, his young face troubled. "Derek, why did my dad not want me anymore?" It was the question Derek had been dreading, the question that had no good answer. He sat down beside Tommy, looking out at the fields where several other members were working on their motorcycles. "You know what, Tommy? Sometimes adults make decisions that don't make any sense. Sometimes they get so caught up in their own stuff that they forget what's really important. But here's the thing. Your dad's choices say something about him, not about you. You're an amazing kid. Anyone who can't see that is missing out. Do you think he'll ever want to see me again? I don't know, but I do know this. You've got a whole bunch of people here who think you're pretty great, and we're not going anywhere." Tommy leaned against Derek's side, finding comfort in the solid presence of someone who cared. In that moment, watching the sun set over the Iowa fields, he began to understand something important. Family was not just the people you were born to. Family was the people who showed up. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, spreading across the state like wildfire. Rebecca Torres had done her work well, crafting a piece that was both meticulously researched and deeply human. The headline read, "Senator Ashford's Secret, the Family He Left Behind." The article detailed Ashford's pattern of corruption, his illegal campaign contributions, his use of political connections to enrich himself and his allies. But woven throughout was Sarah's story, the human face of a larger pattern of callousness and self-interest. There were quotes from former staffers who had witnessed Ashford's treatment of his ex-wife. There were financial records showing how he had hidden assets to avoid proper child support payments. And there was a photograph of Tommy, though taken from a distance and with his face obscured, holding his toy motorcycle on the porch of the clubhouse. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with commentary, most of it critical of the senator. Supporters began distancing themselves, announcing that they were reassessing their relationship with Ashford's campaign. Donors who had written large checks suddenly developed amnesia about ever having done so, but it was the attempted kidnapping that truly captured the public's attention. Security footage from a nearby business had captured the entire incident, and it had been included in a separate news report. The video showed Sarah fighting against her attackers, showed Tommy standing frozen on the sidewalk, showed Marcus and the Iron Guardians arriving to intervene. And it showed Victoria Ashford moments later accusing the bikers of being criminals while they stood over the woman they had just saved. The contrast was devastating. On one side, a group of leather-clad men risking their safety to protect a stranger. On the other, a politician's wife more concerned with appearances than with truth. The video went viral within hours, viewed millions of times, shared and reshared with comments that ranged from outraged to incredulous. Victoria watched the coverage from her bedroom, curtains drawn, phone turned off. She had become the villain of the story, the face of privilege and prejudice, the woman who had mocked heroes while defending the interests of a corrupt husband. The irony was not lost on her. In her quest to protect her social standing, she had destroyed it utterly. Senator Ashford held a press conference that afternoon, attempting to get ahead of the storm. He stood at a podium surrounded by American flags, his expression grave, his words carefully chosen. "I want to address the allegations that have been made against me," he began. "First, regarding my previous marriage. Yes, I have a son from that relationship. I am not proud of how I handled the situation following my divorce. I should have been more present in my son's life, and I deeply regret any pain my absence has caused. It was a calculated move, an attempt to appear humble and contrite while admitting nothing substantive. But the reporters were not having it. Senator, can you explain your connection to the men who attempted to kidnap your ex-wife? I have no connection to those men. Any suggestion otherwise is defamatory. But the company that rented the van has ties to your law firm. How do you explain that? I cannot comment on ongoing investigations. Senator, video shows your wife accusing the bikers of being criminals while they were protecting Mrs. Mitchell. Do you have any comment on that?" Ashford's composure cracked, just for a moment. "My wife made a mistake. She apologizes for any offense caused." "Does she?" "Because we reached out to Mrs. Victoria Ashford for comment and were told she was unavailable." The press conference continued to deteriorate. Ashford's prepared answers were no match for reporters who had done their homework, who had documents and sources and video evidence that contradicted his careful denials. By the time it was over, his political career was effectively finished. At the clubhouse, the Iron Guardians watched the coverage with grim satisfaction. They had not sought the spotlight, had not wanted to become part of the story. But they had done what needed to be done, and now the truth was coming out. Sarah stood with Marcus on the porch, watching Tommy play in the yard with Derek and several other members. She looked different than she had a week ago, less afraid, more hopeful. The dark circles under her eyes had begun to fade. "What happens now?" she asked. Now the lawyers take over. Chen found enough evidence to get the kidnappers arrested, and they're already talking to the FBI in exchange for reduced sentences. Whatever they know about Ashford's involvement, it's going to come out. And Tommy? What about custody? Patricia says you're in a strong position. Ashford's lawyers are going to be too busy defending him against criminal charges to fight you in family court. And even if they tried, no judge in the state would rule in his favor after this. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching her son laugh as Derek pretended to chase him around the yard. It was the first time she had heard Tommy laugh like that in months. "I don't know how to thank you. All of you. You don't need to thank us. This is what we do. But why? I keep asking myself that question. Why would strangers put themselves at risk for someone they've never met?" Marcus considered the question, looking out at his brothers, at the property they had built together, at the community they had created. "When I was overseas," he said slowly, "I saw a lot of bad things. Things that made me question whether humanity was worth saving. But I also saw good things. Acts of kindness in the middle of war zones. People sharing food when they had none to spare. Strangers helping strangers for no reason other than it was the right thing to do." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I came home with a choice. I could focus on the darkness, let it consume me like it did so many of my brothers. Or I could focus on the light, do everything in my power to add to it rather than take away. The Iron Guardians, this place, these men, it's my answer to that darkness. Every time we help someone, every time we stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves, we're pushing back against all the ugliness in the world." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by the simple truth of his words. "My son thinks you're superheroes." "Nah, We're just guys on motorcycles who decided that looking the other way wasn't an option. Anyone can do what we do. Anyone can choose to help. The only superpower we have is caring. 6 months later, the world had changed in ways both large and small. Senator Marcus Ashford had resigned from office, facing federal charges related to campaign finance violations and obstruction of justice. His political career was over, his reputation destroyed, his legacy one of corruption and cowardice. Victoria had filed for divorce, retreating to her family's estate in another state. Her dreams of political prominence turned to ash. Sarah and Tommy had moved back to their hometown, into a small house with a backyard where Tommy could play. The custody agreement had been finalized, giving Sarah full custody with no visitation rights for her ex-husband. The child support payments, finally enforced by a court that was no longer in Ashford's pocket, arrived on time every month. Tommy was thriving. He had started 2nd grade, making friends, playing Little League baseball, slowly healing from the wounds of his father's abandonment. He still asked about his dad sometimes, but the questions had become less frequent, less painful. He was learning that family could take many forms, that the people who loved you were more important than the people who were supposed to. The Iron Guardians had continued their work, organizing charity rides and community events across the state. Their confrontation with Senator Ashford had raised their profile significantly, bringing in new members and new donations. They used the attention wisely, advocating for veteran mental health services and child welfare reform, turning their momentary fame into lasting change. On a warm Saturday afternoon in September, the clubhouse hosted a special event, a barbecue to celebrate the first anniversary of what the members had started calling the day we met Tommy. Sarah had driven out from town with her son, bringing homemade cookies that had become legendary among the bikers. Tommy ran straight to Derek when they arrived, showing off a drawing he had made. It depicted a group of men on motorcycles, their vests clearly visible, standing in front of a small figure that was obviously meant to be himself. "That's us, right?" Derek asked, examining the artwork with appropriate seriousness. "I can tell because you gave me the best hair." "You're the coolest," Tommy confirmed. "Well, Mr. Marcus is the coolest, but you're like 2nd coolest." "I'll take it." Marcus watched the exchange from across the yard, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. In all his years of service, in all his years of running the Iron Guardians, he had never imagined that his greatest mission would begin with a politician's wife insulting his brothers in a parking lot. Life, he reflected, had a way of bringing people together in unexpected ways. Sarah approached him, 2 glasses of lemonade in her hands. She offered one to him, and they stood together watching the festivities. "I had lunch with Rebecca last week," she said. "Her article won an award. Something about investigative journalism and public service. She deserves it. She did good work." She asked if she could do a follow-up piece, about Tommy, about how he's doing now. I told her I'd think about it. "What are you thinking?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching her son play. "I'm thinking that his story might help other kids, other families going through similar things. If even one person reads about what happened to us and finds the courage to ask for help, then it's worth telling." That's what I thought too. The afternoon wore on, filled with laughter and music, and the particular kind of joy that comes from community. The bikers told stories of past rides and future plans. The children ran through the fields, their screams of delight echoing across the property. Sarah talked with several of the club members' wives and girlfriends, women who had become her friends over the past months. As the sun began to set, Marcus called for everyone's attention. He stood on the clubhouse porch, looking out at the gathered crowd, his expression thoughtful. "A year ago," he began, "we had a pretty interesting day. Some of you were there. You remember what happened. A woman needed help, and we helped her. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't heroic. It was just what we do." He paused, looking at Sarah and Tommy in the front of the crowd. "But something else happened that day. Something I didn't expect. We became a family. Not just the club, but all of us. Sarah and Tommy, everyone here tonight. We found each other in a parking lot because some rich lady thought we didn't belong at her fancy party." Laughter rippled through the crowd. That rich lady was wrong about a lot of things, but she was especially wrong about who belongs and who doesn't. Because here's the truth. Everyone belongs somewhere. Everyone deserves a place where they're accepted, where they're protected, where they're loved. For a lot of us, this place is that somewhere, and I'm grateful for it every single day. He raised his glass. To family. Not the one you're born into, but the one you choose, the one that shows up. To family, the crowd echoed. Tommy pushed through the adults to reach Marcus, tugging on his vest until the older man knelt down to his level. "Mr. Marcus, can I say something?" "Sure thing, little man." Tommy turned to face the crowd, his small voice carrying across the yard with surprising clarity. "I used to think superheroes only existed in comic books. But then I met the Iron Guardians, and I found out superheroes are real. They ride motorcycles and they wear leather and they help people who need help. And," he paused, searching for the right words, "and I'm really glad they found me and my mom, because now we have a really big family." The applause that followed was thunderous, drowning out everything else. Sarah was crying openly, surrounded by people who had become her lifeline. Derek lifted Tommy onto his shoulders so the boy could see everyone clapping for him. Marcus stood quietly, watching it all, feeling something he had not felt in a long time. Peace. The party continued into the night, but eventually people began to drift away, heading home to their own lives and responsibilities. Sarah found Marcus one last time before she left, Tommy already asleep in the back seat of her car. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I've been thinking about for a while." "What's that?" "When Victoria Ashford mocked you in that parking lot, she thought she was putting you in your place. She thought she was reminding you that people like you don't matter, that you're beneath her notice. People have thought worse. But here's the thing. She was the one who didn't matter. Her opinion, her judgment, her whole way of seeing the world, it was worthless. Because while she was worried about appearances and status, you and your brothers were out there actually making a difference, actually helping people, actually living lives that meant something." She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it briefly. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. For showing my son what real strength looks like. For showing me that there are still good people in the world." "The good people were always there, Sarah. Sometimes they're just wearing leather vests instead of suits." She laughed, wiping her eyes, then walked to her car and drove away. Marcus watched until her taillights disappeared down the road, then turned back to the clubhouse where his brothers were cleaning up from the party. Derek approached, carrying a trash bag full of paper plates. "Good day, boss." "Good day. You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about everyone belonging somewhere. I used to think I didn't belong anywhere. Foster care does that to you. But now I know that was wrong. I belong here, with these guys, with this family." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "You always did, brother. You always did." They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have seen each other at their worst and best. The stars emerged overhead, countless points of light in the vast darkness. When Marcus finally rode home that night, he took the long way, letting the wind wash over him, letting the rumble of his engine fill the silence. He thought about Sarah and Tommy, about their journey from fear to hope. He thought about Victoria Ashford, trapped in a prison of her own making, surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. He thought about his brothers, about the thousands of hours they had collectively spent helping strangers become friends. And he thought about the parking lot, about that moment when everything had changed. A woman's contempt had been the spark, but the fire had always been there, burning in the hearts of men who refused to look away when someone needed help. That was the real story, not the confrontation or the scandal or the dramatic rescue. The real story was simpler and more profound, that ordinary people could choose to be extraordinary, that strength and compassion were not opposites but partners, that the measure of a life was not what you accumulated but what you gave away. If you have watched this far, it is because you feel this story in your heart. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and understand who truly appreciates the stories on this channel. Before you go, hit that like button if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to remember that heroes still exist. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because in the end, we are all just people trying to find our place in the world. Some of us ride motorcycles. Some of us wear suits. Some of us are children waiting by windows for parents who never come. But all of us, every single one of us, have the capacity to make someone else's life better. To stand up when it would be easier to sit down. To speak when silence would be safer. To love when fear tells us to hate. That is the lesson of the Iron Guardians. That is the lesson of Sarah and Tommy. That is the lesson of every person who has ever refused to look away when something wrong was happening. We take care of our own. And in this world, everyone is our own. The motorcycles sit in the clubhouse garage now, resting until the next ride. The leather vests hang on hooks, waiting to be worn again. The photographs on the walls tell stories of lives touched and families helped. Somewhere in Iowa, a little boy sleeps soundly, dreaming of motorcycles and heroes and a world where people show up for each other. Somewhere else, a politician sits alone in an empty mansion, surrounded by the ruins of everything he sacrificed his family to achieve. And somewhere on a dark highway, a man rides through the night, the wind at his back and purpose in his heart, heading toward whatever tomorrow brings. Because tomorrow there will be another Sarah, another Tommy, another person who needs someone to stand in their corner, and the Iron Guardians will be there. They always are.